The wind on Velax 9 didn't howl, it hissed, like something old and bitter dragging its breath across a planet that had long since given up caring. Jake Bannon squinted against the grit-laced gusts, one hand shielding his eyes, the other slamming his ship's ramp shut with a hollow clang. Dust coiled around his boots, curling like smoke, as if even the ground didn't want him here. Velax 9 had a reputation across the sector, the place you went when you had nowhere left to go. A world of scavengers, ghost traders, broken code, and rusting war tech that still twitched with leftover AI whispers. A planet that once boasted mineral wealth and cutting-edge terraforming projects, until it was bled dry and dumped like a forgotten cassette in a digital world. Jake kicked a stone, muttering to himself, "Drop the parts, get the credits, leave before something explodes." He didn't like this job. He didn't like most jobs, but this one had that smell, the kind that clung to your skin like betrayal. Still, he had bills, a ship that drank fuel like a politician drank promises, and not a soul in the galaxy waiting on him. Not anymore. He adjusted his utility vest and walked past scorched-out barricades and towers sagging under layers of corroded metal in desperation. Scavenged satellites stuck out of the dirt like tombstones. Someone had graffitied a message across a crumbling bunker wall in Galactic Basic. "Here lies hope. We sold her for scrap." Jake barely flinched. This place didn't surprise him anymore. Velax 9 was where empires sent their leftovers, and where people like him ended up when they ran out of other places to go. A flicker of memory tugged at him then, uninvited. A face, a voice, a laugh carried by static across a busted comm unit. "Promise me, Jake. If I don't make it out, don't come back for me. Run, live." Blaze, his last crewmate, his friend, lost in a botched rescue on Drova 4. Jake had ignored the plea and returned anyway, only to find a smoking crater and silence on all frequencies. He blinked hard, clearing the memory like clearing a fogged visor. Not today. Today, he had one job: deliver a crate of retrofitted flux stabilizers to Outpost Kreth and pretend he didn't notice the smell of black market implants or the distant screams. The outpost guards didn't ask for ID, just grunted, accepted the cargo, and waved him toward the command tent with all the hospitality of a prison gate. Jake waited for his credits to ping through while trying not to breathe too deeply. Even the air felt used up here. Then the shouting started. It wasn't the usual marketplace chaos. This was sharper, intentional. It came from beyond the rail tracks that sliced through the outpost like a forgotten scar. Jake turned instinctively. He told himself not to care, but he moved toward the noise anyway. What he saw made him freeze. 2 women were chained to the tracks, not metaphorically, physically. Rusted cuffs locked their limbs down, binding them to old, unused rails warped by time and heat. One of them, tall, regal, with amethyst skin and dark eyes that shimmered like oil in sunlight, sat with her spine perfectly straight, as if she refused to let fear touch her. Her black hair drifted around her like velvet smoke. The other thrashed against her restraints, cursing in a language Jake didn't recognize. Her green skin streaked with dirt and blood. Her white hair whipped in the wind like a battle flag. Fury radiated off her in waves. Jake's heart kicked in his chest. "Trial by sacrifice," someone muttered behind him. He turned. Locals, spectators, all watching like it was a show. "What the hell kind of trial is this?" Jake whispered. A guard stepped forward, thick-shouldered, face like shattered glass. He carried a ceremonial staff with jagged edges and old-world tech laced through its core. "You outsider," the man barked. "You've seen it. You must decide." Jake's stomach dropped. "Decide what? One lives, one dies. You choose. Their crimes are known, but only one is to be spared. You speak the verdict." Jake's eyes snapped to the tracks. The purple woman looked up, meeting his gaze. Her face was unreadable, but not cold, searching. The green one snarled, "Don't you dare play their game, soft skin." And then Jake heard it. The low metallic rumble in the distance, a sound that didn't belong anymore. A train. "Are you serious?" Jake said, voice rising. "That thing runs?" "It will be here in 2 minutes," the guard said. "Decide." "I don't even know them," Jake shouted. "How am I supposed to—" "Because we don't decide, outsider. You do." Jake turned, eyes wild. He wasn't a hero. He was a glorified garbage man with a wrench and a playlist from the 22nd century. He didn't do this, but then he saw it, not their chains, their eyes. The purple woman, still and silent, looked as if she'd already accepted death, but not from despair, from pride. dignity. The green woman wasn't fighting for her life. She was daring the universe to take it and choke on it. This wasn't justice. It was entertainment. Jake's breath hitched. No, he said. No. He ran. Back toward his ship, his legs cutting through sand and debris. He threw open the storage hatch, yanked out the first thing his fingers touched, his crowbar. Heavy curved earth steel, old but solid. He sprinted back. The train was close now, screaming through the distance like a metal god gone mad. He didn't think. He dove. The first lock, stubborn. He jammed the bar in and twisted. The metal shrieked, bit into his hand. Blood welled up, hot and fast. Almost. Snap. The chain broke. The purple woman rolled free with barely a sound. He crawled to the next. The green woman was cursing in 3 languages. This is insane. You're welcome, Jake growled. He ripped at the shackle. It held. The train was a thundercloud now, bearing down. Come on, come on. Clank. The second lock shattered. Jake hauled her upright with a grunt. They leapt together as the train screamed past, inches from their heels. The ground shook. Sand exploded into the air. Then it was gone. Silence. The 3 of them lay in the dust, gasping, coughing. Jake's arm throbbed where the metal had torn it open. He blinked, sat up. They were staring at him. You fool, the green woman muttered. The purple one looked, moved, not surprised, just quietly undone. Jake opened his mouth and passed out. Jake Bannon woke up with the unmistakable taste of blood and iron in his mouth. His body throbbed with the deep ache of hard-won survival, ribs sore, muscles tight, throat dry as powdered bone. The ceiling above him wasn't one he recognized. It wasn't the dull metal of his ship or the exposed wiring of an outpost med bay. No, this was different. Woven fabric stretched across a framework of bent support rods and salvaged parts. A makeshift shelter, temporary, but deliberate. And he wasn't alone. The soft murmur of voices reached his ears before his eyes could fully focus. There was a rhythm to it, a pattern of tone and breath, like 2 distinct melodies counterpointing each other, sharp and low, calm and lilting. Then a face leaned into view, purple skin, deep onyx eyes, and a calm, unnerving composure that made Jake instantly remember where he was and why. Lyra. He sat up too quickly. Pain flared in his side and he hissed through clenched teeth. You should lie back, Lyra said, her voice quiet and even. Your injuries are minor, but they will worsen if you insist on acting like a Terran bull. I'm not great at taking orders, Jake muttered, trying not to wince as he pulled himself up further. A snort from the far corner. He's alive, Syrah said, unimpressed. Soft-Skin survived. Lucky him. Jake turned his head. The green-skinned woman sat on a crate, arms crossed, a blade strapped across her back that hadn't been there before. Her white hair was pulled into a loose knot, and she watched him with the wary eyes of someone expecting betrayal at any moment. Jake rubbed his face. Okay, South, I didn't dream that, right? The train, the tracks, you 2 being chained up like bad Hollywood plot twists. You didn't dream it, Lyra said softly. Jake looked between them, eyes narrowing. And the whole "you're bonded to both of us now" thing, that wasn't a joke? Syrah scoffed. Do we look like we're laughing? Jake blew out a breath and leaned back against the wall of the shelter. Great, just great. There was a moment of silence, the kind that crept in when nobody wanted to say the next thing out loud. Jake broke it. Why were you chained to the tracks? Lyra and Sarah exchanged a look, brief but weighty. Lyra answered first. Velax 9 operates outside the jurisdiction of any central authority. Its laws are remnants of what once passed for order. What you witnessed was an ancient method of judgment, twisted now into entertainment for the desperate and the cruel. And your crimes? Jake asked. I refused to surrender my mind, Lyra said simply. A regional collector wanted me as a cognitive interface. My people are prized for their mental acuity. He offered payment to my handlers. They sold me. Syrah's jaw tightened. I killed 3 enforcers who tried to chain my sister. They couldn't take me in openly, so they waited until I was separated, then dragged me here, said I could earn absolution if someone chose me. Jake stared at them. And instead you got me. A half-broke hauler with a crowbar and no sense of self-preservation. You chose neither, Lyra said quietly. You chose both. That is not something our cultures account for. Jake scratched the back of his neck. Story of my life. Outside the shelter, wind whispered through the canyon, low and constant. The planet's broken heart never seemed to stop sighing. Jake sat in silence, piecing things together. He couldn't just fly off. Not yet. Even if he wanted to, which he admitted a very small, self-preserving part of him did, he owed them more than that. Whatever this bond thing was, it clearly meant something to them. And if the locals thought he was dead, maybe he could use that to their advantage. He looked at Lyra. This bonding, what is it exactly? She didn't speak right away. Instead, she stood, walked to a satchel made of stitched fiber, and pulled out a worn data tablet. She handed it to him. Symbols flickered across the screen, some familiar, others not. Then they shifted into translation. The Bonded Savior Protocol, Viral Tradition, Hybrid Culture 7th Sector. Jake read aloud, slowly. If a soul is rescued in the moment of finality, by an outsider who breaks the cycle, they are bound by fate, spirit, and tradition. The Savior becomes an anchor, a living symbol of freedom, chosen not by lineage but by action. He looked up. You believe in this? Lyra nodded. My people live by logic. But even logic accepts that acts of impossible defiance carry weight beyond reason. It's not just spiritual, Sira added. There's resonance, a biological imprint. You saved our lives in the instant our bodies thought death was final. Something changed. I can feel it. Jake blinked. Are you saying this is literal? Like physically? Sira pointed at him, narrowing her eyes. I can hear your heartbeat, even when you're 3 paces away. Jake's stomach twisted. Yeah, okay, that's weird. You think this is easy for us? Sira shot back. Do you know what it means to be bonded to someone you don't know? Someone who smells like grease and cheap rations? Jake raised his hands. Hey, I shower, when I can. Lyra stepped between them, her voice calm but firm. We are 3 beings bound by an accident of fate, but that does not mean we must remain enemies to one another. Jake sighed, letting his head fall back against the wall. I didn't sign up for this. No, Lyra said, but neither did we. Outside, the wind shifted. A new sound carried with it, distant but distinct. A droning hum, unnatural, mechanical. Jake sat up straighter. That doesn't sound like wind. Sira was already on her feet, reaching for her blade. Lyra closed the tablet and pocketed it. Jake looked between them. I thought the locals thought I was dead. They did, Lyra said, stepping toward the flap of the shelter. But news travels fast, especially when it disrupts tradition. Are we talking angry mob fast or execution party fast? Jake asked. Sira flashed him a grin, feral and sharp. Why not both? Jake pulled himself up, rolling his shoulders. His muscles ached, but adrenaline burned hotter. So what now? We run, Lyra said simply. No, Sira said, tilting her head. We hunt. Jake blinked. You two really are opposites, huh? But deep inside, he felt it too. That pull. That strange, humming thread that hadn't been there before. Maybe he didn't believe in fate. But something had happened out there on the tracks. Something that chained more than just metal. And whatever came next, he wasn't walking away from it. Not anymore. The wind hadn't let up since dawn, cutting through the canyons in low, whining waves. It brought with it the scent of rusted machinery and dry earth, but also something new, burnt ozone and the faint static of moving energy. Jake Bannon stood at the mouth of the makeshift shelter, his crowbar hanging from one hand, eyes scanning the horizon like a man trying to guess which way the universe might punch him next. Lyra stood beside him, silent and still. The amethyst hue of her skin shimmered faintly beneath the dim sun, her expression unreadable as she stared out over the red rock ridges. Her black hair fluttered in the wind like silk cut from shadow. She didn't ask if he was ready, because she already knew he wasn't. Behind them, Sarah paced the length of the shelter, her green skin glowing dully in the filtered sunlight. Her long white hair was now braided in a warrior's coil, and the curved blade strapped across her back felt more like an extension of her spine than a weapon. Every few steps she'd glance toward the direction of the approaching hum, her jaw clenched tight with anticipation. Still nothing? Jake asked, voice low. Lyra shook her head. But it's coming closer. Jake grimaced. Yeah, that's what I was afraid of. He didn't know who or what was on its way. Maybe enforcers, maybe bounty scavengers, maybe worse. But after saving 2 chained women in front of a baying crowd and dragging them out from under a death ritual, he was pretty sure someone had a grudge. Or several. Jake turned back into the shelter, brushing past Sarah, who didn't stop pacing. We need to move. Now. I say we take them, she said, not looking at him. Make a stand. Prove that the bond is real by defending it. Jake stared at her. And get shot, stabbed, or spaced in the process. Sarah finally turned. Her eyes burned with an intensity that made his throat dry. You don't win a bond by running. Lyra stepped between them. We don't win it by dying either. Jake ran a hand down his face. Do you two always argue like this, or is it just a special performance for my benefit? Sarah narrowed her eyes, and Jake caught the flicker of something behind her scowl, something like worry. But she said nothing. Jake sighed. Look, I get it. You're warriors. Proud, powerful, stubborn as hell. But I've survived out here by knowing when to fight and when to vanish. This? He gestured to the slowly approaching whine of machines. This is a vanish moment. Lyra turned to him, her voice soft but firm. Then we vanished together. That was the thing. The way she said it, together. Not just as an obligation, not just because of whatever ritual had tied their fates together, but because in that instant, she meant it. Jake nodded once. Grab what you need, we're moving. They left behind the shelter within minutes, climbing down a crevice into the belly of the canyon where Jake had spotted a hidden path earlier. A narrow, winding cut through the stone that led toward an old crash site marked on his nav map. It wasn't much, just the fractured hull of a centuries-old freighter lodged between two cliffs, but it was shelter. And right now, that counted for everything. They moved quickly and in silence. Lyra led with surprising agility for someone so poised, while Sarah took the rear, her sharp eyes scanning every ledge and ridge above them. Jake stuck to the middle, crowbar in one hand, his blaster in the other, just in case. By the time they reached the wreck, the sun had dipped below the canyon's edge, throwing long shadows across the landscape. The freighter's twisted hull groaned in the wind, its metal skeleton half buried in dust and regret. Inside, it was dark and still. Jake lit a glow orb and hung it from a dangling beam. The yellow light spilled over broken panels, shattered cargo pods, and faded murals that hinted at a more hopeful time, one long since extinguished. Lyra settled quietly near a wall, adjusting her cloak as she sat cross-legged. Her skin seemed to absorb the light, the amethyst tones shifting like calm waves. Sarah stood near the entrance, one hand on her blade hilt, the other resting lightly against the curve of her hip. She didn't speak, just watched. Jake leaned against a broken console, finally letting out the breath he hadn't realized he was holding. Well, he said, this is cozy. If you ignore the bloodstains and the fact we're probably surrounded by desert psychos. Sarah didn't laugh, but her lips twitched just slightly. Jake looked at Lyra. I don't get it. You're from a culture that worships logic. Bonds like this, do they make sense to you? Lyra's eyes found his. They defy sense, and yet they persist. Even among my people, there are truths beyond calculation. Jake nodded slowly, digesting that. And you? He asked Sarah, glancing toward her. What does it mean to you? She didn't answer at first, but then she spoke, her voice low, almost reluctant. Where I come from, bonds are earned through blood, through combat, through fire and endurance. You didn't fight beside me, Jake. You saved me. That's different. Jake let out a soft breath. So none of us really know what we're doing. Sarah gave a half smile. Speak for yourself, soft skin. But there was no malice in it, just tired humor. The glow orb flickered above them, casting shadows that danced across the wrecked walls. Jake looked down at his hands. They were still dirty, still trembling a little. I've spent most of my life hauling garbage across dead systems, he said suddenly. Kept my head down. Never stayed long enough to matter. Then I see two strangers chained to a rail, and I don't even think. I just move. Why? He looked up. Why did I do that? Lyra tilted her head. Because you saw something broken and chose to make it whole. Sarah stepped forward, crouching beside him. She took his hand, rough, scarred, still scraped from the crowbar, and placed her own over it. Her green skin against his made the moment feel unreal. You chose, she said. That's what matters. In a world where no one chooses anything but survival, you chose us. Jake stared at their joined hands. He felt it again, that strange hum beneath his skin. Not just adrenaline, not just instinct, something deeper. Then from outside, a sharp whistle cut through the quiet. Not wind, not machines, voices. They were here. Jake stood. We hold. We don't fight unless we have to. Agreed? Sierra nodded once. Lyra stood silently, her hand drifting toward a control module on the wall, fingers already calculating angles, escape routes, alternatives. Outside, footsteps crunched over sand and metal. Jake gripped his crowbar tighter, the weight familiar now, comforting. He didn't know what was coming next, but this time he wasn't running, not alone, not anymore. The tunnel air was dense with memory. They had walked in silence for nearly 2 hours, through winding, narrow corridors carved half by machine, half by desperation. The glow orbs swung from their belts in dim arcs of amber light, revealing flashes of rusted metal, old symbols etched into the stone, and signs of those who had passed through this place long before them. Jake walked at the front now, blaster holstered, crowbar slung across his back. The adrenaline of their escape was long gone, replaced by a quiet heaviness that settled in his limbs and his thoughts. Behind him, green-skinned Sarah moved like a shadow, always scanning, always ready. Her steps were measured, her breathing steady, but her shoulders remained tight with tension, like a bow strung too long. Lyra followed in silence, her violet skin luminous in the gloom. The calm poise she usually wore like a second skin had begun to crack at the edges. Her eyes were alert, but not scanning for threats. She was watching him, measuring perhaps, or remembering. When they finally emerged into a wide chamber, a collapsed junction, half-collapsed, and ringed with ancient scaffolding, Jake called for a stop. He set his pack down on a flat slab of stone and stretched his aching back with a low groan. "We'll rest here. 2 hours max, then we move." No one argued. Sierra slid down beside a metal support beam, legs stretched out in front of her. She rolled her shoulders, then unfastened her blade sheath, laying the weapon gently across her lap like it was something living. The glow orb at her hip caught her green skin in bands of shifting light, highlighting the silvery scars crisscrossing her upper arms. Jake noticed the way she stared into the dark, jaw tight. He sat a few feet away and broke the silence. "You've been quiet." She didn't answer right away then. "Because I'm remembering." Jake nodded, watching her profile. "Want to talk about it?" Sierra gave him a look that could have cut through steel. But then, to his surprise, she exhaled, not sharply this time, but long, almost tired. "I used to believe in the warrior code," she said. "We're trained young. Loyalty, strength, obedience, especially obedience. But I had a sister, not by blood, not officially. She was born to a servitor line. Fragile, they said. Too weak to be anything but used." Jake listened without interrupting. Sierra's voice dropped, becoming almost tender. "I saw her once, when she was 5, small, wide-eyed, curious about everything. And I knew she didn't belong in that system. She was born for stars, not cages. She means a lot to you," Jake said softly. Sierra nodded, green fingers brushing over a mark on her forearm, faint, circular, barely visible in the light. "When they came to take her, I killed the guards. All 3. Didn't hesitate. I told her to run, then made sure they'd never follow. I was arrested a week later." Jake leaned forward. "What happened to her?" "I don't know," Sierra said quietly. "They kept her hidden after that. Moved her. Maybe they executed her. Maybe she escaped. I'll never know." Her jaw clenched again. "And when they chained me to that rail, they didn't say her name. They just said I'd broken caste law, that I was unstable, unfit for purpose." Jake's chest tightened. "You were trying to protect her." "I know that," Sierra snapped, eyes flashing. "But my people don't see protection as loyalty, only compliance." He didn't reach for her hand. He didn't need to. She wouldn't have taken it, not yet. Instead, he just said, "You saved someone. You tried. That counts, even when no one sees it." For the first time, Sierra didn't argue. She looked away, but her expression had softened. On the far side of the chamber, Lyra stood motionless, watching, her violet features unreadable. Jake turned toward her. "You've got that same look you had on the rail." "What look?" Lyra asked. "Like you've already calculated the outcome, but don't like the result." The corner of her mouth twitched. "I suppose I have." She walked toward them, her robes brushing softly against the dusty floor. When she sat, she did so with the grace of someone trained from birth to control not just her movements, but her presence. Jake could almost feel her thoughts ticking behind her calm eyes. I was raised in the Hall of Precision, she began, voice low. We were the chosen, genetically enhanced for memory retention, analytic processing, emotional regulation. We didn't play, we didn't bond, we absorbed, observed, served. She looked past Jake now, as if seeing something far away. I was excellent. I rose fast. I designed predictive systems for diplomatic simulation. My models could foresee riots, wars, revolutions, weeks before they began. But I saw something else too. A flaw. Jake tilted his head. In your work? No, Lyra said. In them, my people, the leaders. They were using our projections not to prevent conflict, but to maintain power, to suppress variance, to eliminate unpredictability. Her voice was steady, but her hands trembled faintly. I spoke out once, just once, not publicly, just a concern to a mentor. The next morning I was sedated, declared mentally compromised, and transferred to an off-record facility. Jake felt anger rise in his chest. They silenced you for speaking the truth. Lyra nodded slowly. When I escaped, I ran as far as I could, but the bounty followed. I was traded, bargained over, labeled a cognitive asset. When I arrived on Velax, the enforcers chained me without question. She looked at Jake now, her gaze full of something raw. I was never supposed to be anything but a mind, never a voice, never a person. Jake reached for her hand. This time she didn't pull away. You're not a tool, he said. You're not a project. You're not broken. She blinked, slowly. I don't understand you, Jake Bannon, she whispered. Your reactions, your unpredictability, your defiance, and yet when I'm near you, my equation's quiet. Jake smiled gently. That's probably because I don't make sense even to myself. Behind him, Sarah let out a low laugh. He's not lying. Jake turned, grinning. I'll take that as a compliment. And for a moment, just one, the three of them sat together in something close to peace. Not silence, not understanding, but a pause, a breath. Lyra leaned her head gently against Jake's shoulder, violet skin cool against his neck. On his other side, Sarah leaned back, stretching, arms behind her head, green eyes finally softening. The glow orb above them flickered. Somewhere in the tunnels beyond, the wind whispered like memory, carrying old pain and older promises. But here, in this makeshift haven, they weren't warriors, or fugitives, or anomalies. They were just people. Broken maybe, but healing, together. The ruins moaned with the wind, and the stars burned cold above the ridge. But inside the stone bones of the forgotten structure, something had changed. Jake Bannon stood at the center of the cracked floor, a piece of rusted piping in one hand and a strip of cabling in the other. He didn't look like a soldier, not even close. His shirt was ripped, his boots scuffed beyond repair, and the stubble along his jaw hadn't been trimmed in a week. But there was a fire in his eyes now, a clarity he hadn't carried when he first landed on Velax 9. He wasn't just reacting anymore, he was thinking ahead. Okay, he said, spreading a makeshift map across a flat stone. It was drawn in grease pencil on salvage polymer, rough but legible. They'll come from the north slope. There's no other clear path unless they want to climb through that mess of collapsed ridges. Sarah, green-skinned and fierce as ever, hovered over the map with her arms crossed. Her long white hair was pulled back into a braid again, her expression tight with calculation. They'll bring at least 2 drones, more if they suspect we're alive, which they do, she muttered. They don't just suspect, Jake corrected. They know. I activated the ship's beacon for a few seconds, just long enough to bounce a ping off the nearest relay. That'll have lit us up like a flare in the void. Sarah narrowed her eyes. You did what? I needed them to come here, Jake said calmly. On our terms. She blinked. You lured them? He nodded. You said we were laying low. Lying low wasn't working, he said, looking her square in the eye. We've been running since the tracks. They'll never stop, not unless we make them. Sarah stared at him for a long beat, the wind rattling the shattered metal behind her. Then she exhaled and nodded once. All right then, Softskin. We do it your way. Jake turned to Lyra, who had remained silent until now. She sat cross-legged near an old console, her violet skin lit by the glowing interface she'd jury-rigged from 3 different power cells and a handheld transmitter. I've reprogrammed the outer defense nodes, she said, eyes focused on her work. They'll send out phantom life signatures every 5 seconds, enough to draw attention and scramble targeting. Jake grinned. Brilliant. I thought so, Lyra replied, with just the faintest arch to her brow. Jake tapped the map. Sierra, you take the west flank. It's narrow, but you're the only one who can move fast enough if they try to flank us. Lyra, you stay near the node tower. Your tech is our best bet for misdirection. And you? Sierra asked. I'll take the bait position, up front, visible. Let them see me, make them commit. Sierra frowned. That's suicide. No, Jake said. That's trust. I trust you both to back me up. He didn't say it to earn admiration. He said it because it was true. And in the silence that followed, something shifted between the three of them. Something quiet and steady, not dramatic, but undeniable. A team had been born. And not just a team, a bond. They moved quickly. Sierra secured the upper ridge with her usual efficiency, laying traps with bare hands, carving warning symbols into rock to mark ambush points. Her green skin shimmered with sweat under the twin moons, and she moved like a predator who knew her land. Lyra worked in ghost light, her violet fingers dancing over cracked panels, coaxing old systems to life with a whisper of code and stolen power. She didn't speak often, but when she did, it was to update Jake with cool precision. Jake spent the hours before dawn wiring trip explosives from scavenged drones and preparing fallback positions. It wasn't elegant work, but it didn't need to be. When the sun finally breached the ridge, they were ready. The first enemy drone came just before noon. It buzzed like an angry insect, scanning with surgical accuracy. But the fake signals worked. It veered toward the side wall where Lyra had lured it with a dummy heat signature. She triggered the pulse. The drone twitched once, and then fell from the sky in a smoking spiral. A beat of silence. Then came the real wave. 3 Judicator enforcers in full scav tech armor. 1 Lord, tall, masked, wrapped in the same red and black insignia Jake had seen scorched into the rail tracks weeks ago. He stepped forward, raising his voice through a built-in amplifier. Outsider, you were warned. Jake stood in plain view, hands open, no weapons drawn. His voice was steady. Yeah, I ignored that. The Lord raised a gauntleted hand. Jake smiled. Then everything exploded. Lyra's signal array unleashed a burst of static that sent every enemy comm system into chaos. Their helmets glitched. Targets vanished. Fire rained from a misfiring turret that she'd hijacked remotely. Sierra dropped from the ridge like a starborn shadow, blades flashing, green skin streaked with dust and fury. Jake ran straight into the center of the fray, dodging stun blasts, swinging his crowbar with brutal efficiency. He wasn't the strongest. He wasn't the fastest. But he was the one they hadn't accounted for, and that was his advantage. He tackled 1 enforcer into the ruins and disarmed him with a crowbar to the faceplate. Lyra jammed the Lord's systems with a resonance loop, just long enough for Sarah to plant an explosive beneath his boots. The Lord reached for Jake, but Jake didn't flinch. He held the Lord's gaze and smiled. The charge detonated. Silence. Ash and metal rained down, and then it was over. Jake collapsed onto the ground, chest heaving. Lyra crouched beside him, her hands on his pulse. Sarah stood over them both, blade dripping, expression unreadable. You okay? She asked. Jake nodded. Remind me to never argue with either of you again. Lyra didn't laugh, but her eyes were warm. Wise. Together, they sat beneath the broken roof of their battlefield, the wind swirling around them. For the first time, Jake didn't feel like an intruder. He felt like he belonged, and the galaxy, for one brief moment, seemed to hold still. The descent into the Earth was unplanned, but not unwelcome. What began as a cautious exploration of an old mining access tunnel led the trio into a part of Velax 9, no longer marked on maps. Jake, walking ahead, noticed the subtle shift first. The air grew damp. The walls no longer cracked and dry, but coated in soft lichen that shimmered like starlight. The silence changed too. No longer hollow and lifeless, but dense, listening. He paused at the mouth of the chamber they had stumbled into, his breath catching. Whoa! The room was massive, a subterranean vault filled with living things. Great vines spilled from the ceiling, glowing faintly blue. Trees with translucent leaves stretched toward a false sky above. A geodesic dome long forgotten by any surface dweller. In the center, a crystalline spring bubbled in silence, its waters catching the light and casting broken reflections on every wall. Behind him, green-skinned Sarah stepped into the light, the awe in her eyes quickly hidden behind her usual guarded expression. What is this place? Lyra entered last, her violet skin glowing faintly in the bioluminescent light. She touched a vine gently, reverently. This was part of the Terraform initiative, she said softly. A contained ecological cradle to test compatibility before colonization. These places were sealed, lost when the corporations abandoned the surface. Jake moved slowly, letting his fingers skim along a bark-covered pillar that thrummed faintly under his touch. And it's still alive. Barely, Lyra said, but it remembers. Sarah rolled her shoulders. That's great, but can it hide us? Jake looked around, scanning the perimeter. There's only one entrance, no direct line of sight from above. If we need a few hours, this is as good as it gets. They set up a quiet camp near the spring, using fallen tree branches and their emergency blankets. Jake started a low-heat cooking unit while Sarah walked the perimeter, blade in hand. Lyra scanned the chamber with her tech, then finally sat near the water's edge, watching the reflections ripple. Jake sat beside her. You okay? He asked. She nodded but didn't speak. After a pause, he added, It's beautiful here. Like it wasn't meant to be part of the rest of the planet. Because it wasn't, she said. This was designed to be untouched, pure. A laboratory for life, separate from the chaos outside. Jake leaned back on his elbows, exhaling. Kind of like you, huh? Lyra turned to him slowly, her expression unreadable. You grew up in a system that tried to keep you isolated, pure, controlled. They didn't want you exposed to the mess. She tilted her head, voice softer. And now? Now you're knee-deep in chaos with a guy who wields a crowbar like it's an heirloom. A small, unexpected smile touched her lips. Jake looked at her a moment longer. Then, without pressure, without expectation, he simply said, Lyra, I don't understand all of this. What bonding means to your people or what it means to you. She met his eyes. It means choice, she whispered. Even if it didn't start that way. He leaned closer, but not too far. You're free to walk away, he said. You both are. But if you stay, I'm not leaving, she said, her voice barely audible now. Jake's breath hitched. Neither moved for a second. And then, slowly, Lyra closed the distance between them. Her hand lifted to his jaw, delicate but sure, and her lips brushed his. It wasn't possessive. It wasn't urgent. It was acknowledgement, acceptance, a silent agreement that whatever had begun between them, however accidental, it was no longer an accident. When they pulled apart, Jake kept his forehead resting against hers. You kiss like someone who does everything with precision, he murmured. And you, she said, kiss like someone who doesn't think before leaping. Jake chuckled. A shadow passed above them. Sarah stood by a curved tree trunk, arms folded, her green skin dappled with soft light. Jake sat up quickly, his face flushing. Sarah, she held up a hand. I'm not mad, she said, walking toward them. But if we're going to talk about choices. Jake stood uncertain. Sarah, She cut him off with a hand to his chest. You don't belong to me, Jake, but I won't pretend I haven't been watching you, that I haven't felt something change. He opened his mouth, closed it again. Sarah leaned in slowly, her green fingers curling lightly into the fabric of his shirt. You fought beside me like a warrior. You protected me like kin. You looked at me like I was more than my scars. Her lips met his. This kiss was different, wilder, hotter. It was fire after starlight, a surge of breath and closeness and unspoken promises. Jake responded before thought could catch him. His hands found her waist, and for one long second, they stood in the middle of a living relic, surrounded by light and roots and memory, wrapped in something new. When they finally stepped apart, breathless, Sarah looked at Lyra. There was no jealousy there, only understanding. A moment passed between them, green eyes meeting violet, and something deeper than rivalry passed through the air. Jake looked between them, confused. Lyra spoke first. You humans always frame love as a competition, Sarah nodded. But maybe some bonds aren't meant to divide. Jake stared at them, heart hammering. So, what now? Lyra touched his chest. Now we move forward. Sarah took his hand. Together. They didn't say more. They didn't have to. In the depths of a forgotten garden beneath a dying world, something ancient and powerful bloomed, not just between them, but because of them. And this time, no one would take it away. The subterranean sanctuary had become more than a refuge. It was a crucible where bonds were tested and emotions laid bare. The bioluminescent flora cast ethereal patterns on the cavern walls, mirroring the intricate web of feelings that now connected Jake, Sarah, and Lyra. In the days following their shared confessions and intimate moments, A delicate equilibrium settled among them. They moved through the arboretum with a newfound synchronicity, each attuned to the other's presence. Yet beneath this harmony, an undercurrent of unspoken questions and uncertainties lingered. One evening, as the cavern's light dimmed to a soft glow, Jake found himself standing at the edge of the crystalline pool. The water's surface was a mirror, reflecting not just his image, but the tumult of thoughts swirling within him. Sarah approached, her green skin luminescent under the soft light. She stood beside him, her gaze fixed on the water. "You've been quiet," she observed, her voice gentle yet probing. Jake sighed, running a hand through his hair. "Just thinking about everything. United States. What happens next?" Sarah turned to face him, her eyes searching his. "Do you regret it?" He met her gaze, sincerity shining in his eyes. "Number, not for a second. But I wonder how we navigate this. The three of us." A soft footfall signaled Lyra's arrival. Her violet skin shimmered as she joined them, her expression serene yet contemplative. "We define our path," Lyra said softly. "Together, but it requires honesty and trust." Jake nodded, feeling the weight of her words. "Then let's be honest. This connection we share, it's unlike anything I've known. But the world outside this cavern hasn't changed. There are still those who hunt us." Sarah's jaw tightened. "The Judicators won't stop. Not until they've erased every trace of defiance." Lyra placed a hand on Jake's arm, grounding him. "Then we must decide. Do we continue to hide, or do we stand and fight?" The question hung in the air, heavy with implication. Jake looked between the two women, seeing the strength and determination etched into their features. He realized that his journey had led him not just to allies, but to partners in every sense. "We fight," he declared, resolve hardening his voice. "But not recklessly. We need a plan, allies, resources." Sarah smirked, a glint of her warrior spirit igniting. "I know of a few dissident groups who'd be sympathetic to our cause. If we can reach them, we might stand a chance." Lyra's brow furrowed in thought. "The Arboretum systems are still partially functional. I can attempt to send encrypted messages, gauge the landscape beyond this cavern." Jake placed a hand over hers. "Do it. But be cautious. We can't afford to draw unwanted attention." Over the next few days, the trio worked tirelessly. Sarah mapped potential routes and contacts, drawing from her extensive knowledge of the planet's underbelly. Lyra interfaced with the ancient technology, coaxing it to serve their needs. Jake trained, honing his combat skills under Sarah's tutelage, while strategizing their next moves. One evening, as they gathered to share their findings, Lyra's console emitted a soft chime. "I've established contact," she announced, eyes scanning the data. "There's a group not far from here, calling themselves the Veil Breakers. They're open to meeting." Sarah's eyes narrowed. "I've heard of them. Former scholars and scientists turned rebels. They're resourceful." Jake nodded. "Then we make contact. But we go in prepared. No assumptions." The following morning they set out, leaving the sanctuary of the Arboretum behind. The journey was arduous, the terrain unforgiving, yet the challenges only solidified their unity. As dusk approached, they reached the rendezvous point, a derelict observatory perched atop a jagged cliff. The air was thick with tension as they approached the entrance. A figure emerged from the shadows, cloaked and armed. "State your intentions," the figure demanded, voice modulated by a vocal mask. Jake stepped forward, hands raised in a gesture of peace. "We're here to join the fight against the Judicators. We have skills, knowledge, and a deep desire to see them fall." The figure studied them for a moment before nodding. "Follow me." Inside, the observatory buzzed with activity. Men and women of various species worked in tandem, their eyes reflecting both weariness and determination. A woman approached, her presence commanding. Her silver hair was cropped short, and a scar ran down her left cheek. "I'm Commander Ilara," she introduced herself. "Leader of the Veil Breakers." Jake extended a hand. "Jake Bannon. This is Sarah and Lyra." Ilara's gaze lingered on their interlocked hands, a knowing smile playing on her lips. "Your reputation precedes you. The Judicators have been relentless in their search." Sarah crossed her arms. "Then you know why we're here." Ilara nodded. "Indeed, we share a common enemy. But trust isn't given lightly. You'll need to prove yourselves." Jake met her gaze, unwavering. "Tell us what needs to be done." Over the next weeks, Jake, Sarah, and Lyra integrated into the Veilbreakers operations. They participated in raids, gathered intelligence, and trained recruits. Their bond served as both a foundation and an inspiration to those around them. One evening, after a successful mission, the trio found themselves alone on a secluded balcony overlooking the vast expanse of the planet. The stars shimmered above, a testament to the vastness of the universe and the challenges yet to come. Jake pulled both women close, his heart swelling with gratitude and love. "We've come so far," he murmured. Sarah leaned into him, her voice soft. "And we have further to go. But together, we're unstoppable." Lyra's fingers intertwined with theirs. "Our journey is just beginning, but with our hearts united, there's nothing we can't face." As the night enveloped them, they stood in silent solidarity, ready to face whatever the cosmos had in store. The battle was over. Not the war. No, that still loomed on the horizon, distant but inevitable. But the night's fight, the years of running, the tension coiled beneath every breath, gone. Outside, the observatory slept. Rebels murmured in their cots. Machines hummed low, and the jagged cliffs of Velax 9 no longer bore witness to conflict, but to possibility. Inside the dome, beneath a fractured ceiling of starlight and cracked glass, a new kind of silence unfolded. Jake, still half-dressed, leaned against a curved beam of old alloy, his body buzzing with exhaustion and adrenaline. The soft light from a single lantern caught in the strands of Lyra's hair as she approached, her violet skin glowing like amethyst in the dusk. She didn't speak. She simply reached for him. He let her pull him down onto the thick bedding they'd laid in the observatory's heart. Beneath them, ancient metal curved upward like a cradle, holding them in a space older than any memory. When Sarah entered moments later, she paused in the archway, the hem of her tunic fluttering in the wind, her hair unbound and wild as she looked at the two before her. There was no jealousy in her gaze, only a knowing smile, the warmth of someone who belonged, not because she'd been claimed, but because she had chosen. She crossed the room in 3 silent steps, then knelt, letting her hand slide across Jake's shoulder, down Lyra's arm, pausing where their bodies met. Jake's breath hitched. Lyra leaned into his side. Sarah kissed his neck, not a tease, but a confirmation. Yes, tonight was theirs. They undressed together slowly, like a ritual, their movements neither shy nor rushed. Each layer of clothing removed felt like shedding the past, the fear, the secrets, the separations. And when at last they stood bare beneath the stars, there was only reverence between them. Jake sat back, taking in the sight of the two women, so different in form, in history, in touch, and yet in perfect alignment. Lyra was the first to move. She climbed onto his lap with unhurried grace, her knees on either side of his thighs, her hands cradling his jaw. Her kiss was deep this time and sure. Her hips rolled forward just enough to make him groan, her rhythm exploratory but deliberate. He had never been touched like this, worshipped, not possessed. She moved with intention, sliding against him, their bodies learning each other again in the low light, her breath hot in his ear as she whispered, "You feel like gravity." Sarah came behind him, her body flushed to his back, her arms wrapping around his chest. Her lips grazed his shoulder, her hands splayed across his abdomen as she kissed down his spine, her breath cool against heated skin. Jake's hands moved from Lyra's waist to her hips, guiding her as she sank down on him slowly, so slowly he nearly broke. Her moan was soft but rising, and as her body accepted him, her entire form shuddered. "Jake," she whispered, eyes fluttering closed. Behind him, Sarah reached up, threading her fingers through his hair, grounding him as Lyra began to move. Each thrust a deliberate, sensual rhythm that made the breath leave his lungs in uneven gasps. And then, Sarah lowered herself behind him, sliding her hand between his legs to where their bodies met, fingers teasing, stroking, applying pressure that made Lyra cry out and Jake arch into her. She was everywhere. Lyra above, rolling her hips with growing fervor, her mouth open in quiet cries of pleasure. Sarah behind, her lips and fingers painting Jake in sensation, her voice murmuring encouragement and low sounds of approval that made his spine burn with need. "Don't stop!" Lyra gasped, leaning forward to kiss him again, deeper, wetter, as if claiming more than just his mouth. Sarah's voice purred against his ear. "Look at her. She's glowing for you, for us." Jake's hands clenched against Lyra's back, his mouth falling open, his body caught between too much and never enough. And when Sierra pressed closer, her own moan muffled against his skin as she slid her fingers inside herself while watching them. Jake nearly lost control. But he didn't, because this was not just lust, it was unity. Lyra rode him harder now, her rhythm desperate, purposeful. Her nails scratched his shoulders, her thighs trembling with the effort. She gasped. Let go, Sierra urged her, voice low, sultry, almost commanding. And she did. Lyra's climax rippled through her in waves, her body tensing, her cry loud and beautiful as she collapsed into Jake's arms. He held her close, trembling, still buried inside her when Sarah pulled him gently down onto the bedding. Now it was her turn. She rolled him onto his back, her movements graceful and confident. She straddled him in one fluid motion, slick with need and already pulsing for him. She took him in fully with one deep, perfect stroke that made them both groan. Jake's eyes locked on hers. Sarah, you're mine, she breathed. Ours. She rode him with power, slow at first, then faster, her thighs clenching, her back arching. Her hands found his chest, her rhythm driving him mad as Lyra curled up beside them, kissing Jake's neck, her hand trailing down Sarah's back. Sarah didn't shy away. Her moans were deeper, darker, born from a place that had never known softness until now. Her climax came like thunder, legs shaking, mouth open, body crashing forward into Jake as her pleasure spilled over her in waves. And still, they weren't done. The three of them tangled again, limbs entwined, mouths seeking one another, fingers exploring forgotten paths of pleasure. They moved in and out of each other's arms through the night. Whispers, laughter, heat, release. Each moment was a story, each touch a promise, each breath a vow. By the time the first light of dawn crept over the glass dome, their bodies were spent, their skin warm with shared heat and their hearts full. Lyra slept draped across Jake's chest. Sierra curled along his side, her hand over his heart. Jake stared at the ceiling, at the stars still fading in the rising light, and let himself feel it, not the pleasure, but the belonging. For the first time in his life, he wasn't lost. He was loved, and in the quiet aftermath, that was the most powerful thing of all.